Welcome to the Crime Dawg Podcast with your host and content creator, Johnny FIORICA, who never saw a cigar or a bottle of booze that he didn't like. Ladies and gentlemen, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Crime Dawg Podcast. I am your host and content creator, Johnny FIORICA. I am a veteran 30-year retired detective with the Rochester Police Department in New York State, along with my two trusted co-hosts, David Simpson. David was a legendary street cop, undercover cop, SWAT cop, and he rounded out his career in the RPD homicide unit. David, welcome to the pod, brother.
Boys, welcome. Happy to be here.
Next up is Jason Blanchard. Jason served the Flower City for 2.5 decades. He's currently working in one of the sections of the city, in Lake Section. He's from Genesee Section, Clinton Section. He's worked all over the Rock. He's the godfather to Goodman 3rd Platoon and my self-proclaimed lead hostage negotiator for the Rochester Police hostage team currently, Jason Blanchard. Jay, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me, Johnny. And David, if you notice, this is the first episode I've not clapped for you, and I think you know why.
Yeah, we had a little banter before we went live, and we should have a blooper reel because I think that's what would really sell this podcast. We talked about crisis. We talked about bail reform. We talked about fentanyl. We talked about the recruitment issues. We also talked about mental health. But I want to go back to number one, bail reform. As we all know, January 2020, New York State passed or hid in their budget 2020 bail reform in New York State. Contrary to all of our chiefs of police and our sheriff saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, they did it. Here we are holding the bag. Got some great advice from you, Jay. I was researching the shit out of bail reform, and I went across a shit ton of studies. I read one from John Jay. I read one from the New York Post. I read one from a local college in Rochester that they released in May of 2023. I read them all. Jay told me, you know what, Johnny? Enough with the stats. Enough with the statistics. Let's just talk real talk. I took his advice because he's 100% right. The one thing that I learned about doing all that research on all these different studies that they did, the only thing that was consistent was how inconsistent they were. The inconsistency is this, depending on who did the study, who funded the study, whose political motivations for writing that study, and so on and so on and so on. You'd read, for example, a study that said, oh, well, this was done because this is pre-arraignment and post-trial, and these statistics came from here and there. No one ever gave you a full front answer. No one gave you the straight shot. No one gave it to you down the middle. I stopped reading them. It drove me nuts. Let me tell you from a cop, from a real street cop's perspective, how bail reform is not only affecting the Rochester community, it's affecting communities all over the United States that have similar laws or bail reform in place. I'm going to tell you why. Look out your window. Watch a newscast. Watch a local, national, watch social media. There's your bail reform. How about when you go to drive down a city street and you see 100 dirt bikes, 100 ATVs doing wheelies, no helmets, surrounding cars, getting into fights with people that are in cars at red lights? That's your bail reform right there. And I'm going to tell you another thing. I don't want to hear from any politicians, oh, I can't believe Walgreens and CVS, they bailed on the communities that they needed the most. No, you bailed on the community. It was your fault. You backed this bail reform. CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, whatever the big box store is, they move out of communities because they have a business model. And that business model is to make money. It's not to have their stuff ripped from the shelves, put in shopping carts like it's Christmas Day every single day, and expect to maintain some level of profit margin. It ain't happening. So don't blame, for example, the store over on Brooks Avenue and Thurston Road that was a pharmacy for as long as I could remember. I think it started with like Rite Aid and it ended up being a Walgreens, and Walgreens pulled out. That was my wife's neighborhood. She grew up in the 19th Ward. That's where her family went and got their scripts for her mom, her dad, my brother-in-law. They pulled out. You know why they pulled out? They can't get robbed and stolen from every single day and expect to have a profit margin. That's what's going on. That's what's going on. That's what the problem is. And you see this if you turn it on TikTok or you turn it on Instagram videos or wherever you turn it on, or the national news, like I was saying, you see these people looting these CVS's and Walmarts and Target and all these other places that you can name, and Home Depot. That's what the problem is. That's bail reform. And if anyone tells you any differently, they're lying to you. You see, because back in the day, we could stop that guy with a shopping cart full of shit walking out of Walgreens. We could do whatever we want relative to using the level of force that was necessary to effect the arrest, because we knew we were going to take him into physical custody because the store was going to press charges. Now, the flip side is this. I get it. Here's what I get. I understand that Walgreens and CVS and all these other big box stores, they don't want their security manhandling people that are stealing. I get it, because you have $500 worth of product, and then all of a sudden they break this guy's two arms that's stealing, and all of a sudden you got a $100,000 lawsuit for $500 worth of product. I get that business dynamic. I understand that. I'm not an idiot. However, after a while, they say, you know what? It ain't worth having the store here anymore. It's not worth having the store here anymore. It's not worth keeping a store in a community where it can't be sustained anymore because the losses are far outweighing the profits. Here's where we are. CEOs pulling out of cities with stores. David, I'm going to tell you this right now. Bail reform, when I gave those examples, those are real examples that people can relate to because they see it. They see it on nightly news. They see it in social media. They see businesses in their community pulling out, right?
Yeah. Well, the big thing for me is the repeat offenders doing the larcenies, whether they be the car thefts or they be the petty larcenies from the box stores, like you said. There's a reasonableness to the idea of bail reform. I think if legislators, and politicians would have talked to cops, and not street cops, but the bosses, the chiefs, the sheriffs, and really sat down with them, clearly there could have been common ground to bail reform that would have made sense if you got the input from professionals. But whoever came up with the idea that you can steal every single day, the same guys are stealing from the same stores every day, and there's no repercussions. They have 7, 8, 9 petty larcenies. They're getting a ticket and they laugh in the face of the cop and they go back and they take the shit the next day. We talked about the other day. The guy gets caught with a gun. He doesn't give a shit because the next day he's back on the corner with another gun because there's no ramifications for those actions. So what the legislatures did is they decided to implement these laws, change the law, and they did so without consulting the professionals that deal with stuff on an everyday basis. Now, I ask those politicians, would they have done this in the medical field? Would they have implemented things that affected how doctors handle their patients in a negative way without any input from them? Would they have gone to the finance sector and they dealt with bankers and reforms to the banking industry in New York State and implemented laws that hurt the financial ability of institutions, of politicians, of companies without consulting the professionals within the industry? Of course they wouldn't have, but they would have gone and done a midnight deal to do bail reform and screw over their constituents in those communities and the cops by handcuffing them. at the last minute without consulting law enforcement in any way. There was no law enforcement professionals that were in on any of these decisions. And, reasonableness is what we come back to anything. We're a middle of the road podcast. Sure, bail reform has some decent ideas there that we can come to middle ground on. But when you get caught with an illegal handgun in your waistband, there's a dangerousness to that. When you commit crimes over and over and over again, there's a dangerous to that. So the common theme is if they would just implement the dangerousness aspect to bail that the feds have, we wouldn't be in this situation because at least judges would be able to make a determination based on, hey, guy's got an illegal handgun in his waistband. Probably going to use it to shoot somebody. Maybe we shouldn't let him walk on the street. Oh, John Smith just robbed from the CVS 13 days in a row. Maybe we're going to incarcerate him for a few days. So maybe it deters him from doing it in the future. Again, reasonableness and consulting with the professionals within the sector that you're making these laws on would have been a prudent way to move bail reform effectively into motion. That was not done. Stupidity of politicians.
Yeah, Dave, thanks. And I'll tell you, I jumped right into this pod because I'm so jacked up about this because...
Me too, I'm sorry.
No, I jumped into it because I know I explained it in previous episodes, and hopefully, I know the police officers, obviously, we know the definition of what bail reform is. Basically, in January 2020, it went into place because politicians, they hid behind the fact that they say that the Black and brown community, who are the majority of the people that are getting arrested, they can't afford being bailed out on the bail that are being set for them for the crimes they've committed. The secondary BS reason was they hid behind that our jails were overcrowded. Okay. And now if you read these studies, they'll talk about, oh yeah, Monroe County saved possibly $75 million because there was 3,000 days where we didn't have incarcerated individuals and blah, blah, blah. I read a bunch of studies about everything. It's all BS. Okay. It's all BS because what it comes down to is bail reform basically in sum and substance says to the cops, here is a small chunk of crimes that you could arrest people for. Everything else, you got to give them an appearance ticket. Jay, crazy, right? You're a street guy. You wear that bag. We call it the bag, the uniform every single day. You're out there. You know what it's like. You're on the streets. Bail reform, man, it is not a good thing for the cops in the community.
Well, that's the understatement of the year, right? So, bail reform, I think you can kind of boil this all down and really simplify it, right? We don't need to use a lot of fancy anything, any cop talk, anything else, right? It's accountability, right? The word is accountability. And we've lost the ability to hold people accountable, right? We've raised the age of juveniles. We don't hold them accountable anymore, right? So you get a pass.
Yeah.
We've allowed people to have serious charges that we hand them a piece of paper for and an appearance ticket and say, please come to court on this date. And if you don't, you'll have a bench warrant and then we'll find you and we'll issue another appearance ticket in all likelihood. So I mean, this is like the definition of insanity, right? Just not using any logic and looking at it. And I know we spoke about this in a previous podcast, but the biggest measuring stick with this, right, is the community safer with any of this? And nobody can look at you in the eye as a police officer and say that the community is safer, because it's not, right? I'm fortunate. I attend a ton of community meetings in the city of Rochester, right? And I speak to people primarily in the Northwest. And I'm not in the business of lying to anybody. And if people ask me a question, I'm going to answer them honestly. I've done it for 24 years. I'm not going to start lying now. And, when somebody says, well, why are we where we are? These are some of the obstacles. And I'm not getting on a political soapbox and espousing my opinions. These are the obstacles that we have. These are the problems that we're dealing with. This is the situation we're working in. I mean, we have a mid-sized city of Rochester that had 83 homicides a year and a half ago, right? Not 2023, but 2022, I believe. That's a huge number. It's an astronomical number. And we've all worked, right, for the last 20 plus years. Those numbers weren't even thought of. I mean, 80 some odd homicides in the city the size of Rochester.
That's crazy.
That's unbelievable. And why are we there, right? Why are we there? So the guns, like you said, David, right? If I'm holding a gun and I get caught with it, I'm probably out, 24 hours later.
Definitely out.
And thinking from the standpoint, right, of the police officers who are on the street, right? The young, aggressive cops, and we got a ton of them who are out there making traffic stops, making street stops, and stepping out with these guys in the Fatal Crescent of the city of Rochester. And, if people don't know, the Fatal Crescent is a crescent-shaped moon that runs from the northeast part of the city of Rochester to the south west part of the city of Rochester. And that crescent is where a ton of violent crime takes place. It's been studied for years in the city. And, our guys and girls are doing great street work out there. But, you go out and you take a gun off the street and you see that guy standing out there the next night. Well, how's that make you feel? Does it make you feel like you made your community any safer? Because, that guy's back out, right? He's back out again. And in all likelihood, he's going to be in possession of another firearm probably by the end of the week. Nonsense.
Well, I'll tell you. So, and I don't want to sound like a broken record for those that consistently listen to our pod, but here's the deal. So what ends up happening is, I know I talked about this, speaking of guns, we talked about it with Mike Curran. We talked about an arrest that was made that they brought me in prior to retiring. I had to come in. We were going to adopt the case federally. Too young. And when we say aggressive street cops, we mean that in a positive way. Aggressive street cops, what I talk about, what Jay talks about, it's guys that are doing positive things, being proactive, not just answering your regular 911 calls for service. The guys that legitimately keep the neighborhood safe. Two of those studs are Colin Blind and Mark Sutton. Those two guys, they make a ton of gun arrests, and they were the ones that I was talking about, that example when we talked to Mike Curran. Curran arrest, I come in, the guy's got a gun on him. He's got an ankle monitor on him because the same two cops, Colin Blind and Mark Sutton, got the same guy 12 months earlier on a gun. And he was on probation for that, hence the ankle monitor. They caught him with a gun that day, but he was on a probation like a couple weeks before for a point-blank shooting. I mean, come on. That's bail reform. That is bail reform in a nutshell. I didn't want to rehash that story again because I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it did make me feel good because I wanted to drop those guys' names because they deserve credit, because they are the two guys, like Jay's talking about, two guys that are positively aggressive street cops, right? They're great. They're going out there keeping the community safe. So keeping consistent with this, okay? Here's what I want to talk about bail reform. I don't want to talk about studies and statistics. We already discussed some things that you see visually how it affects you. Here's another reason. We have what we call order maintenance crimes. And for people that don't understand what an order maintenance crime is, it's a disorderly conduct. It's an obstructing governmental administration. It's a loitering charge, okay? These were three charges, mainly disorderly conduct, that cops, good street cops, had in their back pocket to make sure that they cleaned up the streets where you could walk out and clear a corner. When you left roll call, you'd have your boss standing up at the podium going, "Hey guys, it's 90 degrees out. Check Clinton Avenue, check all the corners, make sure no one's loitering or hanging out there for no reason. If you ain't buying bread and butter and milk for the family, no reason for you to be standing on a corner." We would clear corners. We'd go up there like gentlemen. We did it all the time, hundreds of thousands of times. You go up there, you clear a corner. Talk to the dope dealers, talk to the gangbangers. "Guys, not today. Got to clear the corner. Boss, make me clear the corners." Usually, most times, they would go away because they know if they didn't, you could lay a disorderly conduct charge on them. It's nothing illegal, okay? It's just failure to disperse. And guess what? Politicians that listen to me talk like that will have a field day because they don't get it. Here's what they don't get. That's a quality of life thing, okay? I call it the Mrs. Johnson effect. Mrs. Johnson looks out her window and waits for street cops like Johnny FIORICA, Dave Simpson, and Jason Blanchard to come out dispersed that corner so she could walk out of her house, because she lived in a neighborhood for 50 years, to go get a loaf of bread, to go get a gallon of milk. Because guess what? Mrs. Johnson may not have a car or bus money to go to Wegmans on East Avenue, and she needs to utilize that corner store. So you literally, by having bail reform, because you can't discount anybody, you can't OGA anybody, you can't loiter anybody. And OGA, basically, not to jump around and just throw some fancy terms at you and all these acronyms. But here's the thing. When you're at a crime scene and you're trying to keep order because there's a murder or a shooting or a stabbing, and somebody wants to act out of line, you have a crime scene to protect. That's what OGA is, obstructing governmental administration. You could say, hey, man, sir, ma'am, back up, please. We're conducting. And guess what? They don't do it. OGA, clink, clink. They're put in the back of the car. If they don't calm down afterwards, you could lock them up for that. It's a misdemeanor. Discount is a violation, kind of like a traffic ticket. Loitering, person didn't have drugs on them, but it was in a bag hidden next to the garbage can. And our surveillance told us 3 guys kept on going to the back of the garbage can. Loitering for drugs, for the purpose of selling drugs. These were things that guys had in their arsenal that you can't do. Bail reform handcuffed them. And now, here's what you can't quantify. You can't quantify my statements. Here's why. When we cleared a corner, we probably prevented someone from getting shot, someone from getting murdered, a fight from happening. Someone maybe wouldn't have OD'd that night because the dope dealer selling heroin out on Clinton and Capel wasn't there to sell him his fix for the night. So you can't quantify it. You can't. But I'll tell you what, we were in the depressed areas of the city. We all worked in the most depressed areas of the city. We know what the Mrs. Johnsons of the city want from the police department. We know, because I can't tell you how many times I had that Mrs. Johnson conversation with somebody. Thank you, officer. Thank you. We had, and this is not us breaking our hands or breaking our arms trying to pat ourselves in the back. You ask any RPD cop, they always had someone in the neighborhood. They would call their cell phone. They would like wave out the window. We couldn't wait for your shift to start so I can go to the store. I could bring my daughter to the store. That's reality. That's bail reform. That's real stuff, tangible stuff that you can put your hands on. And I'll tell you another thing. Bail reform totally handcuffed our boys and girls out there working the streets. It totally handcuffed them. And this is what this podcast is. We're giving a voice to people, to our brother and sister officers that don't have the platform or the podium. I'll be their mouthpiece. But I'll tell you what. Here's the thing. You can't quantify it. You cannot put a measuring stick on it. But like I said, just look out your window. Look out your window and you'll see bail reform. Look at the chaos, not only that sometimes, most of the time happens in the city or around this nation. That chaos, that's bail reform in 99% of those incidents. David, I told you I was going to be on my soapbox today because this thing just really sticks in my craw, bail reform. It just sticks in my craw.
One thing I want to point out is, you know, you describe clearing a corner and people being on a corner. And I just want, for those that aren't on the job or don't have someone on the job, you got to understand that if you go to Jeff and Bartlett on the west side on a nice day, you're not clearing 4 people. You're clearing 50 people. All right. There's 50 people congregating at Jeff and Bartlett, maybe 100 people on both sides, on all 4 corners. It's an open air drug market. There's stores there. It looks like a concert just got out. When you come out of roll call on 3rd Platoon and you go down Jefferson Avenue and you're heading from Clifton Street and you're heading southbound there towards Jeff and Bartlett, it looks like a concert just got out. So when we're talking about clearing a corner, we're not talking about kicking 2 guys that are standing there shooting the shit off the corner. We're talking about 50 people that have no legitimate means for being up there doing anything other than bad stuff, okay? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out who's going to buy a jug of milk, who's really going to work, and we know who's got a job and really going to work because they're there every day going to work. All right, it's not tough to figure out. And we know who the dope dealers are that are standing there every single day selling dope and people telling us they're selling dope. So when we're talking about clearing corners, we are saving lives and we are allowing kids to come home from school and not walk through this chaos and people to be able to go to the store to get milk. That's what clearing a corner is, okay? It's dangerous. It can be downright scary for one cop to get out because they're outmanned sometimes 40, 50 to 1. Maybe you got to call a couple of cars to clear the corner. But when you clear those corners and you have the means and the tools to clear those corners, it makes the neighborhood safer. But you wouldn't understand that when you're sitting in Albany passing last minute legislation and you've never gone down to Jeff and Bartlett in the middle of August at 3 p.m. Never in your life. Because you've never experienced it. You've never smelled it. You never tasted it. You never looked in people's eyes. Okay? That's what clearing a corner is. So just so everyone has it really clear what it is. It's not the same as what it is in Fairport or in Webster or in Greece. It's much different in the gut, okay? And that's what we're talking about. And the second thing I want to mention is something that Jay mentioned, which is the guns and these cops that are going out there doing the stuff that we did when there was teeth to getting someone with them. When I used to catch someone with a gun, or Johnny used to catch someone with a gun, that was the grand slam arrest, the literally 12-point buck of law enforcement. When you grabbed a guy with an illegal handgun and it was a good grab, you got him. And he was going away and there was problems. And there was a reason to risk your life because that's what you're doing. Let's not make it, no bullshitting. I know you have a gun and I have a gun and I'm going to catch you by any means necessary, take that gun off of you. If you try to shoot me, I'm going to shoot you. If you fight with me, I'm going to fight with you and I'm going to arrest you. And I know that. There's no more dangerous game in the world than hunting a guy that carries a gun. Okay. And these guys are doing it nowadays. And the guy's out the next day. I can't believe they're doing it. I can't believe they sign up for this. I used to be I prided myself on being one of the most aggressive, hardest, badass guys there was. No shot I would do it because they get out the next day. Why am I risking my life running through backyards in pitch black, potentially getting in a gun battle, dying for a guy to be out hours later? It's insanity. I'm done.
Yeah, so you make a good point, David. So that we talk about crisis episodes, and that is something.
I think I just got in crisis.
A domino effect.
Talk me down, Jay. Talk me down.
A domino effect of bail reform, and we're going to talk about it in a future episode, is recruitment. You're saying exactly what people are feeling. You're saying exactly what they're feeling. So because of these laws and things that the New York State has implemented and other jurisdictions around the country have implemented, that's one of the prongs of the fork why recruitment is down. We have young kids who want to be cops, and then we have a ton that don't want to be cops. That's a problem. David, you mentioned Jefferson and Bartlett, self-labeled by the neighborhood, Angry Town. It's called Angry Town. And that's what they call it.
Oh, it's angry. It's real angry.
And the second thing is one of the exact examples, which...
My favorite part of town, by the way.
We don't have to get into it, but when I was a young detective, I came out of the undercover unit, was in my suit. You were still in uniform, and I remember you making a gun grab literally on Jefferson Avenue, and a riot started. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, I remember.
But yeah, I mean, we're not going to get into it, but that's what you're dealing with. You made a gun arrest. I was in my suit, came down to help. Next thing you know, we're fighting the whole street. Literally
Bottles,
fighting
rocks.
the whole street.
Yeah.
Johnny, did just to clarify, did David make the gun arrest, or did Ralph Montanelli make the gun arrest? I think he just was in 34 and just kind of hung out, and Ralphie made the arrest. David, no offense.
It was mayhem. The story that David, the story that was David was relaying to everybody was an actual incident that he took part of, that I took part of. I remember Jackie Schumann and I were literally fighting with somebody a block away. I mean, I'm in my suit. It's like 90 out. Anyways, whatever. So, but the bottom line is, this is what you're getting. This is what you're getting. You're getting this incident, Jason, or these incidents happening all over the city because it's bail reform, the institution of bail reform.
Well, yeah, and just like we said, right, the ability to clear those corners and to hold people accountable. I've used that word 1,000 times tonight, but I mean, I guess I can't drive that point home enough. I mean, just like you said, Johnny, we can't measure the intangibles, right? We clear a corner and people aren't there, and they're in their backyards, or they're in their front porches, or they're at their homes, and they're not out on the corner, doing whatever they're doing in a high narcotics area, or an area where we know there to be potential violence, and we've cleared that corner, and we hold that, area for third platoon or for midnight, and there's not a violent act. That's a win, right? That's a win for us. It's a win for the community, and it's another night without gunplay in whatever area of the city that was. And the officers who work those areas, right? It doesn't take long. You work 6 months, on Clinton 3rd or Lake 3rd or Jenny 3rd. You know who the players are. Just like David said, you know who the problematic people are. You know who the ones who are out there dealing dope, not the ones who are waiting to catch the bus to go to work, right? And we know it from our observations and from people telling us. So these are things that, when we are shagging these guys and girls off the block, there's a reason for it, right? And we knew how to talk to people. You don't just go out there, right? There's an art to this. We all get it, right? Street cops, city cops, wherever, you know how to talk to people. You get out on the corner, you're outnumbered, but you're still going out there and accomplishing what you need to get done. So, I mean, these are things that are, as old as time, right? That style of up and down the block. And the other thing, that we all knew, we all knew when somebody turned 16, right? We all knew who the problematic kids were. And we knew that when there was an ability to hold them accountable, we held them accountable, right? Whether it was disorderly conduct or OGA, whatever it was, that was a tone setter. Here's how it's going to be. Have some respect for what we're trying to accomplish, and we'll all get along.
One thing, Johnny and Jay, that you mentioned is that there used to be a fear. I couldn't tell you, when I came on the job, guys would literally tell you, I'm not holding a gun. They would hide it somewhere. They wouldn't ride and hold a gun. Like it was a rare, like when you got a gun, it was like, literally, like I said, it was like a 12-point buck. Like when you caught a gun in a guy's waistband, that was a thing. Like you had to chase, you had to hunt, you had to get informant information from people on the street to get that. It wasn't like 20 guys on the corner, 17 of them got a gun on them. I mean, and that's because of bail reform. That's because there's no fear to hold on to that gun. And it's so much not a fear that the next day when they get out, they got another gun. So there's no fear. That's what bail reform does to hardened criminals. It loses the teeth, the bite of the criminal justice system.
Yeah. It's like disciplining a kid. Don't touch the stove. Don't touch the stove. You're not going to have a cookie. Don't touch the stove. Touches the stove, still gets the cookie. That's the problem. Listen, if you like this episode, hit the thumbs up button for us. If you really liked it, subscribe to our podcast, please. We appreciate all the support out there. Listen, we got a lot of future episodes coming on, a lot of good content. But if you can't make it, like my brother-in-law Frankie Grassi says, who cares?